I started competitive Pokemon in Generation 4, and back then, and a long time afterwards, Life Orb was one of the most venerated items in the game. You would throw it on just about anything. Because, on paper, it's great. 30% power boost, that's amazing. And you have the flexibility of switching moves, so you don't have the million ways of getting exploited like a choice item might. And, it's much stronger than, the 20% boosting items, which are either limited to a single type, if it's like charcoal or splash plate or something, or if it's expert belt, which you have to hit super effectively to even get it, and you hit harder than that against everything. Yeah, 10% recoil. So what? Well, that was then, and in more recent years, I have been feeling like, you know what, I kind of hate Life Orb. And I have talked to some other players about it, and I have noticed that sentiment spreading more and more. So, some things have changed, and we'll go over that. Now, before we get into that, obviously not every Pokemon using Life Orb is the same. Right? And before we even get into that, then I will quickly mention that this idea that, Life Orb is, maybe not the best thing in the world is not exactly new either. I mean, even in Generation 4, there was a saying, what's the only thing that stops Infernape from killing everything in sight? Its own Life Orb. And there was something similar applied to Salamence, for example, when that was legal. But yeah, that shows actually a perfect example of the previous point, which is that not every Pokemon running Life Orb is the same. A Magikarp Life Orb Pokemon, ever since Clefable was running a mixed set in DPPUU, yeah, it was running a mixed set because DPPUU is just that amazing. It's really good, too. It's not a gimmick. Ever since Magikarp Life Orb was first discovered, then it's like, oh, well, this is clearly the best way to do it. 30% boost, that's definitely much preferable to the choice items if you're not taking recoil. And Sheer Force obviously came out of the gen after, and Sheer Force Life Orb is also absolutely monstrous. It's not as good as Magikarp because if you have a move that isn't boosted by Sheer Force, then you still take Life Orb damage. Like the go-to example would be Landorus Incarnate running HP Ice, or in Gen 5, or knockoff in Gen 6. But that's just semantics. Really, it's just, in practice, it's just as much of a terror that it hits this hard and it's not even taking recoil from it. And that's kind of the trend. The recoil, yes, it is a big deal. And the overarching theme of this is, I think, over time, the reason this sentiment has spread is that we value longevity more. So, yeah, and then there's some Pokemon which don't have, the ability to negate Life Orb recoil, like Magikarp or Sheer Force, but their typing means they are much more suited to running Life Orb because they have good natural longevity to begin with. So it's not hampering an issue that is already there. If we take some Gen 4 examples, Mixed Flygon is a great Life Orb user because, number one, it needs the power really, really badly. But number two, it also is resistant to Stealth Rock, immune to spikes and toxic spikes, and immune to Sandstorm. So it is not getting passively worn down to begin with. So you are feeling that Life Orb recoil much less. Another example might be Lucario, where it's quadruple Stealth Rock quadruple Stealth Rock resistance, and immunity to Sandstorm and Toxic Spikes and Toxic, means that, yeah, okay, this thing is going to be just fine running Life Orb. Also, it really, really likes the power. So I guess a byproduct of this might also be that as Pokemon have gotten stronger over the generations, they no longer need Life Orb's power as much. When you're dealing with, Gen 4 Pokemon like Infernape and Flygon, even Lucario, they're pretty strong, but they also kind of need the boost. And as things get stronger over the generations, then it's like, oh, well, I don't really need the recoil for this to be the strongest thing in sight. So that's one thing. But yeah, the comparison between something like Flygon and Lucario, and then something more vulnerable to it like Infernape and Salamence and Dragonite after it was after Salamence was banned, it's night and day, because Infernape neutral to rocks, affected by spikes and T-spikes, and weak to Sandstorm. So, whereas Dragonite and Salamence obviously have a big nasty Stealth Rock weakness. Now, this is not to say that the item cannot work on them, but it requires a lot more attention to detail, I guess, specificity and how you use it, precision for sure, foresight. And that's not really the kind of autopilot strategy that most players are going to be going with most consistently, because it's tough to pull that off against good players on a regular basis. Yeah, and also a playstyle does have something to do with it as well. Like, for example, this whole Life Orb wears you down thing, this is relevant to your average style of team. And I'm not saying, balance or stall or whatever is your average style of team, but your average style of team is going to switch around. Your average style of team is going to have... is going to need some sort of longevity, right? Because you are not just going to spam a bunch of setup sweepers and overwhelm the opponent in 10 turns and that's it. So, obviously for something like hyper offense, then where you are not switching a lot and you want to win the game as fast as possible, then sure, Life Orb is a lot more acceptable on something like Volcarona, let's say, if you are trying to win the game that fast, because the longevity is not that much of an issue in shorter games. Longevity, the longer the game, then the more it is going to be exploited. And when you have a longer game, against teams that take the game at a slower pace, then you do not want to be putting yourself on a timer. You do not want to be wearing yourself out. So players have generally gravitated more, rather than let's try to brute force through everything with Life Orb, then let's be more. I almost said tactile, but that's not the right word. Let's let's embrace some more tactics, I guess. That was not the prettiest way I could have phrased that, but whatever. Yeah, so, and this is seen in a lot of strategies, like, how Starmie will pretty much never run Life Orb in DPP anymore. Or how, not to say it's unviable, but it's incredibly rare. Or, Kingdra, another example. The immediacy and lack of being worn down of choice specs has become a lot more popular on them. And yeah, okay, choice items are more exploitable, for sure. Protect, sub, being setup fodder, whatever. Yeah, but then they bring with them a level of sheer strength, which is really, really difficult to match. They're stronger than Life Orb, and they don't wear you down. So you can see how choice items have become preferred in these kinds of for these kinds of Pokemon. Not setup Pokemon, obviously, but Pokemon that are trying to act as wall breakers. Do a ton of damage. Some strategies I remember that would have been totally normal back in Gen 4 would have been something like in Ubers there was this specially defensive Pursuit Scizor, which is supposed to take, big Draco Meteors and help pursuit the Lottie twins and, withstand all sorts of stuff. And it ran Life Orb, just because the logic... And by the way, I am not, trying to rip on old players, oh, how could they not have seen this? Because, again, it was something that they were aware of. And, I think a lot of the better players had a very good eye for this kind of thing. Even those that would regularly use Infernape, they would be careful about how they supported it, because they knew Infernape doesn't kill stall if they just switch around your attacks a million times and let you die to your own Life Orb. But yeah, like something like this is just the way the game has evolved to really focus more on not giving your opponent the tools to wear you out, through your own power. And that's why choice items and all that. So, yeah, so Scizor would be running this defensive set with Life Orb. Yeah, you want a little more power on Pursuit and Bullet Punch and U-turn or whatever, but, you also got to take the hits. So, or a more relevant example, a more common example, I should say, because that Scizor set was also admittedly very rare, but I remember it was also just like a normal thing to use. But a more common example would be something like DD Roost, Life Orb, Salamence, or Dragonite in OU. Now, I'm not saying that set or those sets are bad, not necessarily, but it's also something that is a lot less likely to be seen now. I mean, Dragonite at least has the bulk for it, but at the same time, you're just compounding its natural issues, which are, rocks and sand. Now, I do think it can work at times because, yes, sometimes you have to roosting on a protect to get more sand damage. Roosting on a turn they switch to try and get more Life Orb recoil out of you. Yes, so there is nuance to this kind of thing, of course. But it is also a lot more likely that a modern player might look to other items like, oh, do I need the extra push from Life Orb? Can I not run Lum or Yachi or lefties? Because even offensive Pokemon running lefties, that has been a big change in the last however many years. Infernape went from, Life Orb, okay, choice items, to running leftovers. Well, it doesn't boost it, yeah, but it prevents it from dying in Sandstorm, prevents it from dying to the move Protect. So, yeah, that DD Life Orb Roost D-Knight, yeah, sure, you can just look at it like a DD Life Orb D-Knight, which is fine, but with Roost in the last slot, okay, sure. But it's definitely not going to be the hit taker that one might have expected it to be a long time ago. It's like, oh, this D-Knight does it all. It takes the hits, it roosts them off, and then, a DD Life Orb sweeps. And now, it's kind of also the idea of not trying to do too much with one Pokemon. So you try to not... You try to focus on what it's strong at and do what you do well as best as you can, as opposed to spreading yourself thin and trying to do a million things at once. So, yeah, that D-Knight set would now be more... let's not try to take so many hits with this, right? Another example, I remember Agility Roost Zapdos with Life Orb. I think that's a very good set. But it's also, also very specific. You gotta... I think with the rise of things like random weather moves on teams to help with the omnipresent Sandstorm, then that kind of thing makes a big deal because Life Orb is often compounded by Sandstorm being everywhere. But even in generations 6 and 7, where there's not permanent sand all the time, well, those are also a lot stronger. But I'll stick with Oris because the power isn't quite Kartana, Magirna, Z move level, Tapu Lele kind of stuff. So in Oris, the power level is still very manageable, and Life Orb is very rare there. Maybe not very rare, but outside of Volcarona, not much is going to be using it. And Volcarona is, very all or nothing. So, on super hyper offense teams anyway. So, something that used to be used in Gen 6, for example, was Life Orb Latios. And yeah, okay, it hits hard, switches moves, stuff like that. And then it just kind of... in Gen 5 too, Life Orb Latios used to be great. And now it's kind of like... I need the utility of this Pokemon more because these Life Orb Pokemon are trying to hit hard and also have some sort of utility to them, right? And then you realize, well, the Life Orb is impeding their ability to have utility. Like if you have Latios switching into Thundurus Therian in Gen 5, for example, and every time you attack, you make your own ability to take on Thundurus Therian or Keldeo worse, then I think it's very easy to exploit. So you would prefer items like, Lumberry or Colbur Berry or what have you. Draco Plate now that gems have been banned. I think this is also with an increasing appreciation for just how much your health percentage is. People used to say, oh, sand and protect, what? That's not a big deal. It's only 6%. And then you realize, yeah, it kind of is. So 10%, on top of everything else you're dealing with. Because when your Pokemon is not hitting the field at 100% most of the time, and so when you're already starting out below 100 and then throwing another 10% onto that, there are exceptions, obviously. In newer gens, I don't think Urshifu had any problem running Life Orb because it just hit so ridiculously hard, and it was resistant to Stealth Rock. That helped. So you would. So that was different because it really was crushing everything in sight with the boost in Life Orb, and it was resilient enough to not really have the Infernape factor. But when your Life Orb Pokemon is not immediately crushing everything in sight, and you just tend to be handing your opponent more tools on how to deal with it. Uh, so Kira Black would be another example in Generation 5. Life Orb KB used to be, pretty good, but it's like that Rock's weakness, that flawed defensive typing, that the fact that it already kind of hits everything really hard to begin with. Yeah, I don't know. And then you start looking at how much it's when you have more longevity to a Pokemon like this, then you wind up doing more damage because you have more opportunities to do the damage. As opposed to just, let me just smack on as many modifiers and boosters as I can. Then, yeah, it tends to be more efficient. On average, again, this can be a case-by-case thing, but I think there is a very good reason why Life Orb has really become less popular over the years. For another this one isn't even a Pokemon that has problems with its longevity, but Life Orb Heatran is incredibly strong. In Generation 4, I think it's outstanding. It hits so hard, and it's immune to Sandstorm and Toxic Spikes, and doesn't have like a big Stealth Rock problem or anything. So yeah, you love the extra power. It makes it really difficult to wall. Forget Clefable switching into that Fire Blast. Good lord, Latios, Dragon Pulse, T-Tar, E-Power. It's nasty, and that Life Orb, boom, my god. But at the same time, you are getting worn down very quickly. I mean, you come in with as little as Rocks Up, and you're at 87.5, one attack, 77.5, and that every piece of chip counts, because a lot of these Life Orb Pokemon, yeah, they're not truly walled by these by the defensive Pokemon they're trying to break through, but the defensive teams with these defensive Pokemon are going to play around them. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to lose a Pokemon, maybe two, but that's going to be their wall breaker, and I will be able to come out on top because I will outlast them. They will wear themselves out. They will run out of steam. Even something like Life Orb Agility Metagross, I remember. That used to be like the go-to. And now if you see Agility Metagross, it will not rarely, but it's a lot more likely to look for opportunity. Yeah, Life Orb is strong, but it's not going to help you against status. It's not going to help you if you get KO'd before you can do it. So it's a lot likelier to run something like Lum or Shuka or Akka. So, yeah, I think that's more or less everything I wanted to say on the subject. There's also ways around it, like, for example, Life Orb Dragonite, like Mixed Dragonite, in a mid-game scenario when Rocks and Sand are up, yeah, that can get kind of rough. But there are ways around that. Like, for example, you can use a very fast-paced style that tries to deny early rocks, and you get that D-Knight in before the opponent has a chance to get up rocks. I mean, one of the most beautiful scenarios is when you can get a Life Orb Pokemon in as rocks go up on that turn, because then you see the opponent, they have that problem where, oh man, I use rocks to deal with this, or to help deal with this, and now it's staring at me from full health, and now I'm in trouble. This also counts for something like Gyarados big time, which is also a pretty good Life Orb user if you use it on a very, very fast-paced offense team. I think the rise of Healing Wish also helps with that kind of thing. I'm a big fan of it. But in DPP, people used to not love Healing Wish in DPP. Should make a video about that. Yeah, that's to the list it goes. There's me talking about how I need to make more videos, which is always the case. Anyway, so hey, you can use a playstyle that can get your Life Orb user on the field quickly before they have a chance, or you can lead off with it. This in Gen 5, I used to have this team I loved with Mixed Dragonite with Multiscale, and I didn't have a spinner or anything, but I would just lead off with it. And so, it was so bulky that, even Latios Draco Meteor wasn't going to KO it. So you just lead off against pretty much everything and start Dracoing and Fire Blasting and Superpowering everything in sight. And it's on the first turn, so you don't really have the problem of getting worn down quickly. And you wind up being a lot more threatening as a result. And Gen 4 is another great example, because Mixed Knight lead is actually a great lead there. But yeah, I think that's basically it. I mean, there's a reason why Life Orb Latias used to be quite a popular Pokemon in Gen 4 during its heyday, and now it's pretty much never used. I'm not saying it's unviable, but it's very specific. It's something that you could use. I mean, there's a couple different styles, not just Hyper Offense where you just Calm Mind and Life Orb Draco. Yeah, okay, that is appealing, for sure. But, I'm sure there's some other stuff that's coming to mind. but it's very specific, and you'd really have to make sure, would I rather not Draco Plate? Would I rather not Lumberry? Is it worth cutting into my excellent bulk and longevity for this extra power? That's something you really have to ask yourself before you use this item. You know, because even if it's not about bulk, like nobody's using lefties on Infernape for the bulk. They're using it just so the opponent cannot wear them down while they try to do their thing. That's pretty much everything. Thank you so much for watching / listening. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next one.